I want you to imagine just for a second that you're at a weekend barbecue.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. And a 7-year-old child walks right up to you. They tug on your sleeve, look you dead in the eye, and ask a really simple question.
Uh-oh. I know where this is going.
They say, can you explain logically why a negative times a negative equals a positive?
Oh, wow. That's an ambush.
Right. And here's the catch. You cannot just say because that's the rule. You can't just, draw out a multiplication table. You have to actually explain the underlying logic to a child.
Which is terrifying for most people.
Exactly. If you just felt like a slight spike of panic right now, you are definitely not alone.
I mean, it really is the ultimate intellectual ambush. Most adults just completely freeze when you ask them this because, well, we've been conditioned to just memorize the result, right?
Totally.
We don't actually understand the mechanism. But if you want the actual logical answer to give that kid, you just have to think of it spatially.
Spatially, like on a number line.
Exactly. Imagine you are standing on a line. Facing forward is positive. Walking forward is positive. So a positive times positive means you face forward and you take steps forward.
Okay, so you move in a positive direction.
Right. It makes intuitive sense. But now let's introduce the negatives.
Okay, lay it on me.
Facing backward is a negative, and taking steps backward is a negative. So if you face backward and then you take steps backward, what direction are you actually moving along that line?
Oh man, you're moving forward.
Exactly. You're moving forward. A negative orientation combined with a negative action gives you a positive movement. It's a fundamental law of physics, really, not just some arbitrary rule in a math book.
Wow. Facing backward, stepping backward moves you forward. I mean, when you frame it like that, it's so incredibly obvious.
It really is.
But almost no adult can just articulate that on the spot. And, that collective mental freeze is exactly what we are deep diving into today.
That's a fascinating topic.
It really is. So for context, we are looking at this leaked stack of strategy documents, pitch decks, and workshop manuals. And they're all crafted by this entity or consultant known as Strategist Kongming.
Yeah, which is an amazing name, by the way.
Seriously. And our mission today is to decode what looks on paper like this really fun, innocent weekend math workshop for corporate families.
Right. But it's not just a math workshop.
Not at all. It is actually a highly sophisticated, stealthy corporate training program. It uses this exact math panic we just talked about to sneak high-level crisis management reform right past the massive egos of C-suite executive.
Which is brilliant, because we are looking at an intervention designed to expose a really critical, invisible bug in corporate leadership.
And the goal isn't just to humiliate management.
No, not at all. It's to force them to confront their own reliance on rote memorization, and then from there, rebuild their organizational reflexes from the ground up.
Okay, so before we look at how this Trojan horse actually works, we first need to understand why adults fail this basic logic test to begin with. Well, you mentioned an invisible bug.
Yeah, the intellectual fragility of modern leadership.
Right. And the documents cite some pretty heavy demographic data here, specifically from the OECD's PIAC data. That's the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies.
The numbers are they are staggering. According to that data, an estimated 57 million adults in Japan alone cannot logically explain that simple math problem to a child.
57 million.
Yeah. And if you extrapolate that across developed nations, you're looking at over 765 million adults.
Oh my God.
Which equates to roughly 95% of the adult population in the developed world.
Wait. Just to be totally clear, we are talking about highly educated professionals here, right?
Yeah.
Like CEOs, senior analysts, logistics directors.
Exactly.
And 95% of them are operating on sheer unadulterated memorization. They just know -3 times -3 is 9 because, their 7th grade teacher said so.
That is exactly it. And our modern corporate systems, they heavily reward this. We reward people who can memorize standard operating procedures and just execute them flawlessly.
Right, but what's the downside?
Well, the problem is it creates deep intellectual fragility. If your whole cognitive framework is built on trusting a rule without understanding why it exists, your foundation is brittle.
I'm trying to connect the dots here to actual business leadership. I get that not knowing math trivia is embarrassing, but why is this a fatal flaw for a corporation? It's like a CEO knowing that their company makes money, but having absolutely zero understanding of how their own supply chain works. So what does this all mean in practice?
Well, this raises an important question. It matters the second the rules change.
Like a crisis.
Exactly. Think about what happens when an organization faces a completely unprecedented crisis, a global supply chain collapse, or a sudden technological disruption, a true black swan event.
Right, where the old rules just don't apply anymore.
Precisely. In those moments, the memorized manuals are useless. The situation is no longer standard. If leadership relies on rote memorization instead of adaptable logical reasoning, they freeze.
Just like they do with the math question.
Exactly. They cannot deconstruct the failure to find a new path forward. They just keep trying to force the old broken rule onto the new, unprecedented problem.
So you've got these highly paid executives operating on this really fragile, rigid operating system. But okay, let's unpack this. Here is the massive roadblock.
The ego.
Yes, you can't just walk into a boardroom and pitch, remedial logic and humility for the C-suite.
Yeah.
They would laugh you out of the room.
Oh, absolutely.
A CEO is never going to sign off on a training program that openly suggests their brain is fundamentally flawed.
No, and that is the core dilemma of organizational change. If you attack the executive ego directly, you lose. The defenses go straight up. This is why conventional executive training often fails. It feels like an indictment of their competence. So to get this paradigm-shifting training into a rigid corporate structure, Kongming's strategy just bypasses the front gates entirely.
Yeah, they use a Trojan Horse. Looking at the pitch deck, this program explicitly avoids standard HR training budgets. It completely avoids the strict ROI gatekeepers.
Which is so smart.
It really is. Instead, it targets the soft, undefended underbelly of the corporate ledger. We're talking employee welfare funds, family day events, CSR initiatives.
It's a brilliant tactical misdirection. The implementation relies on two distinct layers.
Okay, what was layer one?
Layer one, the surface narrative is totally benign. It's pitched as a fun, musical math game for employees and their kids.
Like a bonding event for a Saturday afternoon?
Exactly. Management signs off on it without a second thought because it checks a superficial employee well-being box. And the budget approval for family events is notoriously relaxed compared to, say, executive leadership training.
Okay, but then you have layer two, the real objective. Wait, so we are tricking executives into taking leadership training by using their own kids as the facilitators.
That is exactly what's happening. While the kids are laughing and playing, the workshop is doing a stealthy installation of what Kongming calls defense OS right into the parents.
Wow.
It forces the executives into that exact scenario we opened with. They are asked to explain the logic of the math equation, and they suddenly realize they can't.
And this is where the kid's presence is the ultimate weapon.
Oh, completely.
Huh.
If a slick management consultant in a custom suit asks a CEO a trick question, the executive's defenses spike. They'll argue, they'll deflect.
I don't have time for this yet.
Right. But when their own 7-year-old child looks up and asks a genuine why, the ego is completely disarmed.
I mean, I'm looking at this proposal, and on paper, it sounds incredibly clever. But I have to push back a little here. Are we really saying that a high-powered executive is going to experience a profound professional paradigm shift just because their kids stumped them on a math problem at a picnic?
Well, it isn't about solving the math problem. It's about the visceral realization of your own blind spots. The documents describe this as stripping away the armor of learning.
The armor of learning, I like that.
Yeah, by putting the executive in a low-stakes family environment where they are allowed to just not know the answer, you create an environment where cognitive resistance drops to almost zero.
Right, they let their guard down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once those defenses are down, the workshop can introduce the core philosophy of true crisis management without triggering any of that corporate buzzword fatigue.
And they do this by turning the math equation itself into the crisis management metaphor.
Yes.
-3 times -3 equals +9. I want to break this down because this is where the strategy shifts from abstract psychology to actionable corporate doctrine.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the math is a literal blueprint for super adaptation.
Okay, so let's look at the first -3 in that equation. This represents the black swan event, right? The unpredictable severe crisis.
Right. And the source documents offer this really visceral, real-world example from the creator's own life to illustrate this.
Oh, the horse thing.
Yes, the horse thing. They describe an incident involving a literal 1-ton kick from a racehorse.
A racehorse.
Yeah, which required a life-or-death physical reaction in exactly 0.3 seconds.
0.3 seconds. I mean, you certainly aren't going to pull out a 500-page crisis binder when a literal horse is kicking you in the face.
No, you are not.
That is a pure, unadulterated -3.
Exactly. Now let's look at how a standard Fragile corporation usually responds to a severe crisis like that.
They usually just throw aggressive positivity at it, right?
Always. They launch superficial fixes, they tell the shareholders everything is fine, and they just double down on the original plan. Let's stay positive and push through.
Okay, so in our mathematical model, that forced positivity is a +3 response.
Yes.
So if we follow the logic, multiplying a severe crisis, the -3, by a superficial, conventional fix, the +3, results in a -9.
Exactly. The situation doesn't stabilize. The damage is exponentially magnified. The company collapses entirely because they applied a rigid, positive rule to a situation that actually required fundamental restructuring.
Which brings us to the anti-fragile response. What does taking a -3 strategic action actually look like in a boardroom? I mean, it can't just mean being pessimistic, right?
No. It means having the courage to lean into the pain of the crisis. A true strategist, what the documents call the military advisor type of leader, they purposefully step backward.
Step backward.
Yes, this means executing painful reform. It might mean liquidating an underperforming department or completely retreating from a key market.
Or taking counterintuitive actions that cause short-term stock drops but fix the foundational rot.
Exactly. They meet the -3 crisis with a -3 strategic action.
And a -3 crisis multiplied by a -3 strategic response results in a massive +9.
That is the visionary element of this whole human capital investment. It's the realization that merely surviving a crisis is a fundamentally flawed goal.
Because returning to zero just means you're still alive, but you've stagnated.
Right. The Defense OS trains leaders to aim for the +9. It shifts an organization from a fragile state that is terrified of disruption to an anti-fragile force that actually requires chaos to fuel its own evolution.
Okay, I understand the philosophy intellectually, I really do. But again, I find myself questioning the practical application.
How so?
Well, how do you actually make an entire workforce from the senior VPs down to the junior analysts internalize this deeply enough that it changes their behavior under actual stress?
Right, because theory isn't practice.
Exactly. You have them for maybe 60 to 90 minutes during a family event. You can't just give them a compelling lecture and expect it to override decades of corporate conditioning.
You are entirely correct. A lecture wouldn't work at all. The cognitive science behind crisis response shows that under extreme stress during an amygdala hijack, your analytical brain just shuts down.
Just go into fight or flight.
Exactly. You revert to your most ingrained physical training. That is why the workshop bypasses the analytical brain entirely. It makes the concept a physical reflex.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The physical element is wild. The documents detail this exercise called the backward walking game.
Yes.
The participants are asked to stand up and physically face backward. This represents the negative orientation. Then they are instructed to take steps backward, representing the negative strategic action.
And just like our conceptual line from the very beginning of our chat, when the parents and children face backward and step backward, they suddenly realize they are physically moving across the room toward the finish line.
They are literally physically manifesting a positive result out of 2 negative actions.
Right, and to cement this into their memory, they introduce music.
Oh, the song.
There is a proprietary song called Number Stairs.
And the manual notes this is available in English and Hindi to accommodate international corporate families, which really shows the scale they are aiming for here.
Oh, definitely. And the lyrics are so simple. Facing backwards, stepping down the stairs, minus times minus makes a plus everywhere.
It sounds like a literal nursery rhyme.
It does, but it is anchored in the concept of the OODA loop.
Observe, orient, decide, and act.
Yes, a concept originally developed by military fighter pilots. In a true crisis, like a 0.3-second racehorse kick or sudden market crash, you do not have time to consciously process a decision.
You just have to act.
Right. If a survival concept is simple enough for a child to sing and for an adult's body to kinesthetically feel, it bypasses the slow, analytical brain entirely. It becomes an unconscious OODA loop, an unbreakable reflex.
I have to highlight a specific instruction from the facilitator manual that I found just fascinating.
Oh, the stumbling part.
Yes. The facilitator is explicitly told to encourage the parents to physically stumble, mess up, and look silly while doing the backward walking game.
It's so deliberate.
Think about the social dynamics there. You have a senior executive, someone who is obsessed with projecting competence, stumbling backwards, and failing in front of their kids and their subordinates. Doesn't that risk alienating the exact people you are trying to train?
You'd think so, but it is actually the most crucial part of the entire installation. It normalizes the minus.
Normalizes failure.
Yes. Corporate culture fundamentally fears failure. It fears looking foolish. By forcing an executive to physically stumble, laugh at themselves, and then continue moving backward to reach the positive goal, you are dismantling that fear.
So when the child sees their parent fail, recover without ego, and achieve the objective, it breaks the ice of perfectionism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It proves that taking a negative step isn't the end of the world.
Okay, so we have this brilliantly subversive training methodology. It tackles intellectual fragility, it bypasses the ego, and it installs a physical crisis reflex.
Right.
But let's look at this purely from a business architecture standpoint. How does the person pitching this guarantee that a company will actually buy it?
No, this is the best part.
The final segment of these documents outlines a B2B strategy that is basically a masterclass in exploiting corporate procurement behaviors.
What's fascinating here is that the entire business model is structured as an irresistible proposition for management. It starts with what they call risk-free glory.
Risk-free glory.
The hosting company, the client gets 100% of the credit, and the public relations buzz for hosting an innovative, family-friendly event. They look like forward-thinking heroes.
And the consultant.
The consultant deliberately plays the role of the black-clad strategist in the shadows, taking absolutely none of the spotlight.
And then you look at the pricing. It is a targeted strike on budget approval limits.
Oh, completely.
They offer a basic official kit for 300,000 yen, where the company runs the event themselves. Or for 1,500,000 yen, they offer a premium package where Strategist Kongming facilitates the event directly.
Which, in the world of enterprise corporate training, 1.5 million yen is literally a rounding error.
Right. Companies routinely drop 10 times that amount on weekend leadership retreats that produce absolutely zero behavioral change.
Exactly. But the true stroke of genius isn't the pricing itself. It is a feature called the alliance bonus.
The alliance bonus. This is the ultimate budget loophole.
Yes. By signing the contract for this 1.5 million yen family event, the organization's representative, which is typically the CEO or a top C-suite executive, receives a quote-unquote free 60-minute one-on-one strategic online consulting session.
Which is normally valued at 150,000 yen.
Right.
Ah, I see the mechanism now. The Trojan Horse opens up right inside the CEO's office.
Exactly. Management justifies the expense to accounting because they are simply buying a fun PR and welfare event for employee families.
Checking the CSR box.
Right. But what the organization is actually receiving is top-tier executive consulting and the beginning of an enterprise-wide crisis management overhaul.
All fully funded by a soft HR budget.
The consultant secures a direct VIP channel to the top decision-maker to rewrite the organization's defensive strategy. It's brilliant.
It is a stunningly elegant funnel. I mean, they even offer the pitch deck itself for 0 yen on a store's digital storefront, simply to capture the email addresses of key decision makers.
Trading a free PDF for a highly qualified lead list.
Exactly. A list of executives who are actively searching for out-of-the-box solutions.
When you zoom out and analyze the entire architecture, you see a truly visionary approach to human capital investment.
It really is an undeniable investment.
It recognizes that middle management often blocks truly innovative training because of strict ROI metrics and just, a general fear of rocking the boat.
Right. Nobody wants to get fired for buying the weird training program.
Exactly. But this system bypasses the gatekeepers, it bypasses the executive's intellectual fragility, and it guides the entire corporate hierarchy through the disarming curiosity of a child.
It's just a profound shift in perspective. We set out today to decode this strange children's math program, and we uncovered a blueprint for total organizational transformation.
A completely stealthy one.
Yeah. It takes adults who have been conditioned to merely survive, rote memorizing rules, and freezing under pressure, and gives them the tools to become an anti-fragile force.
An entity that actively uses negative events to leap forward into massive positive growth.
It serves as a really powerful reminder that the most profound strategic shifts rarely come from, like, complex corporate jargon or thick policy binders.
But no, almost never. Sometimes the most effective way to rewire a rigid corporate culture is to remember how to step back, embrace a little bit of failure, and learn like a child again.
I couldn't agree more. So as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on regarding your own professional environment. Take a hard look at your organization's current crisis management plan.
if you could even find it.
Right. Is it a dusty 500-page binder sitting on a shelf that absolutely no one is going to read when the next disaster strikes? Ask yourself, what is your team's equivalent of backward walking?
That's the real question.
When the next completely unpredictable black swan event hits your industry, are you just going to slap a forced positive bandage on it and pray you survive? Or are you genuinely prepared to strategically embrace the negative to achieve your massive positive 9?